All right, well, good afternoon, AP Gov. It is Friday, April 24th. Today, we're going to be looking at the two FRQs for chapters 5 and 7, which is the presidency and the bureaucracy. So click over here, share my screen with you. And we'll let Veronica in here. All right, so this was the first document that we were looking at, which is, let me add this, which is the chapter 5 and 7 FRQ review. It has the prompts in there of itself, and then I have a brief presentation. So let's just focus on the first question here, which is the argument. It's the argumentative essay. It's on a 7-point rubric. Let's go in here. Let's just do this, because I think it's a good reminder. I'm still getting questions from people about the structure of the exam itself, which makes me worried that we're not keeping up on some things. But again, you were looking at 25 minutes for this first question. So I gave 45 minutes total on the Canvas report for this week. But again, it breaks down 25 minutes for the essay with 5 minutes to upload, and then 15 minutes on question 2, the scenario, with 5-minute upload times. The questions are separate. You must answer the questions in the order that they give them to you, and the timer does not start until you see that question. So question number 1, I'm starting to see some people really turn it around. I've only looked at a few, and I would say if your last name goes through C, I've only really dipped my toes into those first beginning parts of the alphabet looking at these questions, but I'm really starting to see people turn it around. And I think a lot of it follows that 3-paragraph model and using the FRQ template. But let's take it over the finish line here with the thesis. Let's make it easy on that grader. Let's make sure that we are underlining the thesis, or at least underlining the because statement. Remember, I'm still, there are still folks I'm not giving thesis points to, because all you're doing is restating that prompt. So this week was, is impeachment an effective, too strong, or too weak of a check on the executive branch? And I still have people that are saying, well, I think it can be both, or they are just saying it isn't a too weak of a check on the executive without establishing that line of reasoning. And a lot of that is because they don't include the because statement. But this is not all. The good news is I am seeing more people following this 3-paragraph structure. Your introduction, which can be as simple as your 1-sentence thesis statement that you've underlined, but introduction with the thesis, evidence 1, evidence 2. That's all as complicated as it needs to be. So here's one way, and then I'm going to actually show you how the document could be used to support both arguments. But the idea that impeachment is too weak, we could be looking at Brutus 1. The article saying that, I think impeachment is just right. You look at Fed 51, separation of powers. Okay, is this something that, we have checks and balances established? It's the right check. It's not too weak or too strong. And then Fed 70, you could say it's too strong of a check. The single solitary executive is meant to be closely monitored. It's easily to keep an eye on one person rather than a large party. But this Brutus 1 thing, let's put a pin in that, and I'll come back and show you a couple ideas that I had, where Brutus 1, I think, actually becomes the most difficult document to use. Okay, I think another article, or the second piece of evidence that could be used in this to say it's too weak, is you could talk about the Declaration of Independence. You could incorporate somewhere in the Articles of Confederation, but look here, you got these question marks. And we're going to continue to see question marks being used in some of the other documents as well. Or just say that impeachment is too strong, you could look at Fed 10. But then you look at 3 different examples of impeachment. Okay, we can say that, is impeachment too weak of a check? We could look at the impeachments of President Trump and President Clinton. The House can pass articles of impeachment, but it really is dead before it even gets started. Is this really an effective check? If you went down this route, you could say, no, it's not. You could say it's just right with President Nixon. He knew he was going to be impeached. He's like, you can't fire me, I quit. So he resigns before he's actually able to be impeached. And then again, if we want to get into Civil War history, we could talk and look at President Johnson. Okay, but this goes back to that tip I've been telling people every single time. Okay, you need to have your own research done in advance. There is no possible way for you to be able to read the prompt on May 11th, to be able to research your answer, and then go back and plan and write an essay all within 25 minutes. You've got to be able to start doing some of the groupings. You've got to be able to group documents together and be able to make at least one connection no matter what comes up. So this is going to go into the second question. I'm not there yet. So here, I'm going back into the first question in and of itself. Okay. Is impeachment and removal an effective check, too weak of a check, or too strong? So here's a couple things that I pulled for Brutus 1, for Fed 51, and Fed 70. And it all comes from this federal or foundational document cheat sheet, which I gave you guys about 2 weeks ago. I would encourage you to build upon this. This is a minimum that kind of groups your documents together, but this is where I got this information from. Okay. That Brutus 1 argued the Constitution gave the federal government too much power and state governments would be nullified, meaning state governments are not as powerful as they could be or should be. And it also claimed the legislative branch's power was unlimited and a threat to liberty. So even though we could say that Brutus 1 falls under that it is too weak of a check, you could say maybe the power of impeachment is too strong, that the Brutus 1 is arguing the legislative branch has unlimited power, was meant to be the most powerful branch, and could be too strong of a check. So really, how you pick information out of this document could be used to argue it is too strong or too weak, and that's where the reasoning point comes in. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of answers more in the second prompt that says, "Oh, you asked me about iron triangles. Here's the definition of iron triangles." Again, it's not enough to say what Brutus 1 is. You've got to be able to reason and explain to the reader why it supports your argument. And in this case, I feel Brutus 1 can go in either direction. Federalist 51 argues the federal government is limited in power through a system of checks and balances embedded within the branches. So could you use Fed 51 as an effective check, that the checks and balances are strong enough to prevent abuse? And then Fed 70 here argues the need for a strong executive, having a weak leader or multiple leaders, run the risk of different opinions and not being efficient. So could you then say that Fed 70 argues a too strong of an executive, or that impeachment is too strong of a check? So again, they give you these three. Something I'm noticing people getting tripped up on is saying, oh, both pieces of evidence must come from this list. They do not. Okay, if you were arguing Fed 51, okay, we've given you a few other examples of things that were not other documents to list. And that is where your research comes in. That's where you're going to need to really be able to know and already kind of have this stuff grouped together. You should have Article 3 and Fed 78 and Article 2 and Fed 70, and add your cases. You can build these kind of pieces together in advance, so when you do get the prompt, you're ready to go and you're not kind of behind the proverbial 8 ball there. So let's look at the second prompt. Okay, and I also included a link in there as well to that template. It's very, very clear the people that are using it and the people that aren't. It makes it very easy to grade because you're following this structure. This structure makes it easy for the reader to know where you're going, to know where the information is found. Some people that are still including these flowery introductions, all I'm looking for is, where's your thesis statement? So the second question starts talking about the FCC. This is your bureaucratic agency. This is your classic scenario question. They give you this whole kind of 2-paragraph thing and is going to ask you, okay, Part A says, describe the function being carried out here by the Federal Communications Commission. Here is what I feel is going to get people into trouble. You're going to highlight that, you're going to copy, you're going to go into Google, you're going to hit enter, and you'll be like, oh, okay. And you go to the very first link, and you're going to start copying out whatever that first link tells you. That is going to be a clue to the College Board very, very quickly that, not necessarily that you are cheating, But everybody, if you have 25,000 people putting the same paragraph in, it's going to be very easy for that software to realize this is where you got it from. Think about everything you're doing runs through turnitin.com and is going to give you a similarity report. You don't want to have your response being similar to 45,000 other entries. So just keep that in mind. So as we go here into that second question, we're looking at iron triangles. And I told you at the beginning of the week, iron triangles consisting of your bureaucratic agency, congressional committee, and interest groups. Yeah, they may not be able to ask you about interest groups, but they could throw iron triangles in, and you've already talked about committees and bureaucratic agencies. So that's what this question was. The effect of bureaucratic agencies and iron triangles. So this comes down to vocab. So that first thing says, describe the function of the FCC. We talked about it earlier in the week, and maybe for some of you in the one-on-ones, this is rulemaking. It is regulation. It is oversight. The function, the role that the FCC is playing in this net neutrality battle is they were making rules, regulations, and oversight. And that second part, part B, asks, well, what's the iron triangle's role? So first thing I want to call your attention to is make sure you're looking at those verbs. What I said about the Google thing, describe is not an identification, and that's where a lot of people got hung up on part B when they said, "Oh, it talks about iron triangles. You just told me what the parts of an iron triangle was, and you didn't actually say how they would be impacting what you had said in rulemaking or oversight in part A." Make sure that when it says explain does not mean just define. Describe and explain are very specific and explicit verbs that the College Board is using in these questions. So what I added and included here, referencing the scenario, describe the function being carried out by the FCC. We could say rulemaking. We could say oversight. You want to give more information, not less. There's a particular group of individuals I can think back when we were answering these questions face to face that were like, oh, if I just put 3 words or 1 word, that could give me the point, right? Probably, but in this instance, I would not put all my eggs into a 1-word basket. You would want to be able to, because it says describe, okay, describe the function. So describe rulemaking or oversight in regards to the FCC and their role in this. You can talk about bureaucratic agencies being appointed by the executive branch, responding to the executive branch. Basically, you want to give more information, not less. Part B says, explain how iron triangles can affect this process. So again, don't just tell me what the parts of an iron triangle are, okay? How does the work of an iron triangle affect this process? So remember, think back to the activity we did in class, okay? You have your congressional committee, they're going to give political support to that bureaucratic agency. If Congress doesn't like what the FCC is doing, they're going to cut their budget. If the FCC isn't on board with what's going on, they're going to, how they actually enforce their role and do their job is going to impact Congress. So go back and review not just this graphic, but go back to the example that you guys created while we were in class. Part C says, FCC created a rule ending net neutrality, explain how Congress could respond to the decision if they oppose it. Most of you are being very successful with this part, with number 2, part C. Remember back, power of the purse. Congress controls the ability to make the budget. If they don't like what the FCC is doing, they cut the budget. Or, most of you are going, if they don't like it, they can pass a law. Okay, they're giving a little bit more information than that. But again, they could, pass a law that, contradicts the net neutrality pieces that are being pushed through. And then obviously it leaves the door open for some other arguments that could be creative there. So question 2, part C, question 2 is worth 3 points. Overall, it's 40% of the overall score. Question 1, worth 7 points. That's worth 60% of the overall score. I've included links to this document here on Canvas on the announcements for today. But keep in mind, a lot of you have review books. A lot of you have access to all the things that we've done previously on Canvas, look back at those previous FRQs. Look back at the ones and use your own ability to grade and assess where you would get points, where you would not get points. And I would especially focus on things like that thesis. The people that aren't getting a thesis point are really kind of, it's tough. It's tough to come back if you don't get the thesis point. 1 out of 7 does not give you much wiggle room there. So that is the 2 FRQs for this week, chapter 5 and 7, the president and bureaucracy. Next week, we're going to be looking at the courts. Again, you can expect the schedule to come out on Monday. We'll do a quick court review on Tuesday. Wednesday, during your block time, take some time to respond to those questions, and we'll do another Zoom review next Friday afternoon, same time, to be able to kind of go through that. Right now, I only have about half of you that have responded to the survey posted on Canvas. So if you have not responded to that, it's on the calendar for today. Take 2 or 3 minutes, give a response quickly. I'll be going through those over the weekend and on Monday and reaching out accordingly. But are there any questions that were not addressed or things that you have now that you would like to know before we go into the weekend? You can throw it in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask.
Has like a point value been given, like for 3, 4, and 5? Like a certain amount of points that you need to get, or have they still not really said?
So we actually never get that. There are some classes that are saying like, oh, hey, if you get these many points, this is guaranteed a 3. It's never, we don't get what that metric is. So usually it's like 12%, 5, 12% for 20% ish on 3s. So usually it's about half people pass, half people don't. And I know the only thing that they've really said so far in regards to grading is you're meant to run out of time. If you run out of time, that doesn't mean you don't get a 5. And they don't want this year's scores to be an anomaly. And what I mean by that is they don't want them higher than the 2019 or 2021 scores, and they don't want them lower than the 2019 or the 2021 scores. I know all the grading is being done remotely, so there's not a cut score like there would be for something like calculus or AP World. Sucks, sorry. Any other questions? Okay. Like I said, I'm working my way through them. I'm sure just like you guys are when you have your work for the week. Sometimes when you sit in front of the computer, it's hard to keep that motivation piece going. I'll tell you right now, I'm working through slowly but surely. So rather than rushing through something, I want to give you some good feedback. I want to score it as best as I can. So keep checking back. If it hasn't been scored yet, we're working on them. Let me do one thing here real quick. Okay. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, hold on. If there are no other questions, guys, I hope this was useful to you. If there's any questions, please feel free to reach out and have a great weekend.